Okay, we'll just do that again. Hello. I have to true up all the pieces of my One Last Dance ball overdress because I cut them out really, really badly and in a hurry, and now I need to fix it. So that's going to be fun / tedious as hell. And in the name of all this kind of YouTube-y, being an on-screen personality, trying to be funny nonsense, and also trying to get comfortable talking in front of cameras, which is not something I'm terribly good at. It's the hottest thing in the world. I thought it would be a good idea to sit down in front of the camera and just talk while I worked about some sewing related stuff and some kind of non-costuming related life update stuff. So we'll start with the life update stuff and then get on to the interesting questions that several of my entirely unsuspecting Facebook friends asked me. They don't actually know that those questions are going to end up in a video, so I'm probably going to have to, like, check whether I can use their names. Next time I'll have thought this through. Oh god, this is so off. So, life update stuff. I have resigned from my job because, quite frankly, it was making me very ill. The honest truth is I don't think that was necessarily the best idea I've ever had, but equally it's made me really stressed. It's put a lot of pressure on everything else in my life, and we collectively as a household were in a position that we could go, hell with that, and I could just quit. I'm technically still employed by them. I had so much holiday left over that I'm technically still employed but on holiday, which is a very weird sensation. As far as I'm concerned, I am now unemployed. Or self-employed, depending on what you think this is. So starting a YouTube channel was something that I've been wanting to do for a while. I have a film degree, some people might know. I have done videos before. It's not... This undercut is new and already pissing me off. Yeah, so I have a film degree. I've done videos before. It's not new to me. My partner actually had all of the kit from working as a marketing person. So there wasn't really any kind of like major investment for me to do it. I just needed, for me more than the time, it was the energy. Outside of the terrible job that shall not be named, I just didn't have any energy to do anything. And everything kind of felt like one intense rush between balancing life and balancing LARP and not really getting to see friends, and then only getting to see friends when you were playing fictional characters together, which is not really the same. So I'm not in the position where I've given work up in order to become a online influencer. I don't think it works like that, but quitting work and being in the process of looking for other things has given me a little bit more space to work on the stuff that I really am excited about. Do I need interlining for these? I'm gonna say that ooh, god damn it, that upper sleeve band. I'm gonna say I don't need interlining for these bits. That feels excessive. What was I saying? Yes, so I haven't given up work in order to start my career as a YouTuber because that seems like remarkably short-sighted, if nothing else. I have no idea if anyone will ever watch these, if this will be of interest to anyone, but I've got the space to refocus a little bit, and one of the things how do I say this? Sewing for LARP, and in particular helping other people sew for LARP, is something that I really love, something that I would like to do more of. Having kind of been aware of the global LARP community a little bit through social media, I feel like the bits of the UK scene that I'm in are not terribly well represented, which is a real shame because, if nothing else, our kit standards are bloody incredible. But seriously, you guys are so good. There's so much. Am I messing with the mic? I am. Just knowing the kind of things that, not even just me, the kind of things that other people come out with and produce, and the stuff that I've seen my friends make. I think everyone here is incredibly talented, and I feel like we could shout about that more, but equally it does come across as kind of intimidating, and it doesn't need to be intimidating. I really love teaching people how to sew, and what this feels like to me is the chance to teach a whole load of new people how to sew, or, you know, how to design a character's kit and how to go thrift shopping for LARP gear, how to not have LARP kit cost £1 million, and also just to kind of make the hobby seem more accessible. I know I talk a lot about how I'm quite new. There are a lot of people who've been LARPing a lot longer than I have, like a lot longer. There are people my age who've already been LARPing for 10 years. And I've also talked quite a lot about how I think having that perspective of being an adult person who didn't want to do LARP until a couple of years ago, and then found out what it was actually like and had to go and found it was really, really good. I think there's a lot that can be communicated through video better than other mediums about what is the cat doing? I think video is a really good medium for communicating what LARP actually is, what makes it fun, what you can actually expect, because I do think the general perception, well, certainly my perception before I started LARPing, was it was a bunch of beardy dudes in a field getting muddy and hitting each other with foam swords. And that is some people's idea of fun, but there's so many people who would get a lot out of fancy dress grown-up make-believe that aren't doing fancy dress grown-up make-believe and don't know it's a thing. Basically, that's one big massive ramble explaining why, in the most pretentious terms possible, hello. Anyway, so that's basically just one gigantic ramble about why I've decided to start a YouTube channel. Actually, I'm not even going to pretend that my objectives are that noble. What I really want to do is teach people how to sew for a living and not have to worry about all this kind of 9-to-5 office job garbage. I've got some big plans for the channel, though they seem like big plans for me. I'm not sure the plans would be as grand as they are in my head. Are you okay, cat? What have you seen? Do you want to be on camera? You don't want to be on camera. Anyway, so yeah, I have some slightly ambitious plans for the channel. I think the plans for the channel are slightly ambitious pretty much because my current plans for upcoming games kit are quite ambitious, let's be honest. The Regenesis finale is coming up, and I've set a bar, and this is my last chance to exceed that bar. It's going to be a time, but this is fine. I'm also conscious of the fact that it's literally taken me 20 minutes to do one pattern piece, so this might take a while. This fabric is the actual worst. It's this absolutely beautiful silk with silver embroidery on it, which looks great, but it's the hardest thing in the world to cut through. And I'm going to need to sharpen my scissors after this, I can just tell. Oh, yeah. Well, that's exciting. That is one pattern piece out of 18. Who needs a clapperboard when you can just sneeze on the microphone? Oh, crap, there's twice as many. This is one of the sleeve pieces, so there's 4 and not 2, which means there's actually 12. We're going to be here a while, kids. Yes, in part 1, I talked a lot about why I'm doing a YouTube channel. And here in part 2, I'm going to answer some questions that unsuspecting friends of mine asked about sewing. I don't know if they want me to use their names. So if it turns out they don't want me to use their names, then I will change that. So Liesel asked, a breakdown of your process for character kit creation and design would be amazing. particularly for someone who like me, who has to buy the kit I want. It's really good to hear how someone looks at a kit brief and a character concept, then goes about building something really evocative. This is an excellent question. We like Liesel. How am I going to do this? Lining and interlining as one, I think, and then the silk individually. God, these are so bad. So, how do you go about designing the kit for a character? For me, so it's really hard to identify one specific way in which I do this, because it is very, very much character, game, and even event specific. Sometimes I come up with a character and I immediately know in my head what they look like. Wow, this is badly cut out. A really good example of this would be Revelations Jones, who was my character for a game called Bluebird. The kit brief was wear basic blacks because we're going to give you a branded overall. So I knew that my options for making that character look like a character were really, really limited. Once I had my character archetype confirmed, I had a very clear idea of what I wanted them to be like, which was this kind of larger than life, very, very rich, but very, very rough around the edges mercenary warlord. At that point, Jones pretty much just existed in my head. I immediately knew she was going to have tattoos. I immediately knew that she was going to have quite extravagantly feminine hair, which set my hair in ringlets, which progressively dropped out through the game and made me look like I was falling apart, literally as well as emotionally. That is a rainstorm. For some reason, Jones was, in my head, always ginger. That wasn't a conscious choice, that's just what she looked like. Once I had that perfect mental image of how I thought this character wanted to look, I then had to set about seeing how I could make that happen. So I looked into temporary tattoos, things that I could do with my hair. I knew that I wanted her to look fit, not as in hot, as in physically fit, which I am not. I played around with a couple of different ideas and eventually I went with wearing a sports bra and having my arms and torso exposed so that I looked like someone who was ready to do exercise, but also there's something for me about feeling confident about showing off more of your body makes you look more confident. I've explained that really, really badly. Quite a lot of the time, it's a case of working with what you have. My kit for Mariana for the first game I ever played was absolutely thrown together at the last minute. I knew I wanted this kind of princessy character. I thought the character was going to go in a very different way to what she eventually turned out to be. I didn't have a lot of time to work on it. I got kind of close to the wire and I was like, you know what, I just need something. She's got an ocean theme, so I need something that's blue and I just need something as a base to work from. And I had a blue medieval dress, which is in no way what I would have picked for a LARP event now because it's 5 meters of boiled wool. That first Mariana dress alone, when you like pack it up into a bundle, it is this big. It's enormous. But I had this blue medieval dress that I didn't have any real plans for. I'd just made it to test out a pattern with some fabric that I had, and then it had gone in a drawer. And so I pulled this out and went, yes, okay, it's blue, it's princessy. Now I just have to make it hers, which I did by adding a lot of trim, leaning really hard into the kind of fantasy elements of it. And then I built on top of that. It had half-length sleeves. So I felt I needed something underneath. That turned out to be a white turtleneck, which gave me this kind of very high-collared, very long-sleeved appearance. And then I was like, hang on, this is giving me some sort of like religious art vibes, so why don't I lean into that? And why don't I make a veil? And then I played around with some other ideas and kind of followed along with that association and ended up with, so I knew she was going to be a army medic and a princess, kind of optimistic in the face of horrible warfare. So that got me thinking about kind of Star Wars and those sort of influences. So that's how Mariana ended up with the Princess Leia buns, which have evolved a little bit as I iterated on the character. And it's how I ended up doing the very stylized Amidala-esque makeup with the line straight across my face and the detailing in the lips and the slightly weird eyeshadow that she has, which is very heavy in the inner corners. Sometimes the looks kind of evolve along with the character. Another example of a character where I had to kind of work with what I had was Ryder. I had the concept of the character, who was a living deck of tarot cards first, because it was going to be Alice in Wonderland inspired, and because I like the style and I wanted to play around with that, I decided that this would be a really good excuse to play around with Lolita fashion. Spoilers, that ended poorly. I now have a wardrobe full of the stuff, and it appears to be a thing that I do now. So with that, I basically had a rough silhouette, kind of a loose idea of what I wanted. Started hunting on the internet, basically. I spent a lot of time camped out on Lace Market, looking at stuff that came up, looking at what was cheap, acquired a whole bunch of pieces, thinking that I would sort it out afterwards. Then obviously actually picking which tarot deck I was kind of collaborative, because I was in a joint concept with another person who was going to be using one card specifically from the deck as their inspiration. So we picked which deck we wanted, which ended up being one with some really, really strong symbolism. And I then kind of started matching up particular cards to particular dresses. So it did come very much from, I have a white dress and a white blouse, and this card has a white owl on it, therefore I will use this idea. And now how can I make that white blouse and white dress look more like an owl? Quite a lot of the time I actually don't have a very hard and fast idea going in of what a character is going to look like. I have a sort of vague idea, and then I see what I can do. I think that the trap that a lot of people who don't sew fall into is that they have a very specific idea in their head of what they want a character to look like, and then they struggle because they can't find anything that is exactly like that. Personally, way more often I have a vague idea of a shape, a colour, a silhouette, the kind of thing that I'm looking for. Sometimes that comes from the brief, sometimes that comes from just having brainstormed the character a little bit and having an idea of what they're like and what their life experiences might be. And then I go and hunt and I see what I find, and sometimes you end up slightly retro engineering the character to fit what kit you have, which may not be something that many people do. I don't know. Personally, until I get the costume on, the character themselves is always a little bit in flux. Which is why I find very short, very intense games and games with no kit actually really challenging, because that's where my characters live. Probably sounds really incredibly shallow. So that's kind of the process that I go through when I don't have a lot of fixed ideas, but I have an idea of what character I want to play in this setting. The other thing is when I'm basically trying to come up with a character and a kit, and I'm going to have to make that kit all in one stream. Obviously, if your kit brief is quite specific or it has a certain aesthetic, the first step is usually research. Whether that's historical research, looking at what other people in the field who maybe are playing as the faction that you want to play as are already wearing, looking at how other people have done the kind of characters that you think that you want to play. I get a lot out of movies and TV and anime and comics, even books where descriptions of clothing are always inadequate. Basically, looking at how other people have done what you want to do is a really good basis for going forward and putting your own spin on it. For me, sometimes that's as simple as trying to find a commercial sewing pattern that feels right. Absalom Calcasta was basically built around quite an extensive wardrobe, a really extensive wardrobe for a character that I played for one weekend, because I'm an overachiever. I got 3 or 4 men's costume patterns, like fantasy, not The Hobbit, not Lord of the Rings, not Marvel, I think was one of them. And I kind of looked at them and looked at how they hung and the shapes that they had and took them all in massively, because for some reason men's sizes don't go small enough for me, until I got the one that I thought felt right. And this was a little bit informed by the brief. The brief for that nation was loosely Scandinavian clothing. I already knew I was going to be going a little bit off-piste because the examples they'd given were of traditional Sami clothing, which I'm a little bit uncomfortable with wearing. So I looked at other traditional Scandinavian dress, long waistcoats, breeches, that sort of thing. So I was like, okay, fine, that I can do. Bring in a little bit of magey stuff. Obviously he was a death mage. I'm gonna wear black. I'm gonna bring in some like mage's robes so I can make some very, in theory, straightforward kind of long hanging sleeves, long robes, that kind of thing. Finding one shape that worked was really key to getting Absalom right, because then it meant that I could just make slight variations on that one key silhouette. This is, to be honest, how I do most characters these days. Either they get one very iconic piece of kit that they always wear. So I'm making a patchwork coat for a game in September. So the brief for that game was vaguely medieval / dark ages, overtones of autumn, not much kind of fine work, but also their god is the god of joy and creation and colours and shapes. And I wanted to make a character who, like me, is a crafter. And so I really liked the idea of like wearing this coat that says I am creative and eccentric and a little bit different. But even then, it really does still come down to, you know, what have I got? What can I find? What is going to work? These days in particular, I'm usually working on a really tight budget for kit, which is actually fine because I have boxes of fabric that I've been accumulating for the past 15 years that I've just never used. And so having this constant churn of new characters is actually really helpful in getting me to not just pick something and go out and buy the fabric and do the thing, actually making myself go through the boxes and go, okay, what have I got? What can work? What have I got? Can I tweak that character? I've got this. What could I play? Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with, in terms of how I come up with a character and how a character looks and what that character wears. I do usually have a sense of this is what I want to make, or this is what I want to wear. And I'm not going to pretend that that's character specific. It is quite often Ash specific. I want to wear trousers and knee-high boots as this character because I want to be read as male, or I want to have a ridiculous floor-length overrobe as this character because I want to wear a ridiculous floor-length overrobe. I think I look really good in kind of bustle dresses, so I'm going to make historically accurate bustle dresses for this Victorian horror game. We've established that I am an overachiever, and as such, quite often people will say, oh, well, it doesn't need to be historically accurate, and I'm like, but it can. I like making historical costume, I like sewing, I like putting the time and effort in, so I do. But equally, I think it's really underappreciated how much you can do by finding modern stuff and just tweaking it a little bit. So many people seem to want to do games that are set either medieval or way earlier, and for some reason they always seem to say, oh, these games will be really easy to kit. That's LARPer brain talking, because the people who are saying, oh, this game will be really easy to kit, already have a stack of like basic tunics and stuff in their wardrobe. If you are a brand new LARPer and you don't sew, you have no way to get basic brown tea tunics. And indeed, if you want to play a weekend-long event, you're going to need at least 2 if you don't want to wear the same thing every single day, or if you don't want to be wearing wet clothes the second day if you get rained on. Or there's so many things that people don't factor in. It's not even that modern games are necessarily any more accessible. What people don't invest in the costume in modern games, they tend to invest in the props. I've often said that the most accessible costume brief is the one that says, wear that thing you were thinking of wearing anyway, which sounds like it would be garbage, but it's what Regenesis has kind of done, and it's what the Forest 100% has done. And I'm going to be honest, I love them. And I loved being able to really kind of flex those creative muscles and not be restricted to early human history where we have documented evidence of what we don't have. So if you do medieval or earlier, there are some colours that you shouldn't have. There are lots of modern construction methods that you shouldn't have. You shouldn't have a lot of fabric because fabric was so expensive. You can't have a lot of patterns. You can have tartan. Anyone who tells you you can't have plaid in the pre-modern era is lying, because they 100% have it. But you can't have lace, and you can only have kind of basic embroidery, and you can have some trims, but they're actually trims that are really, really expensive to get now because they're handmade. Inkle loom woven braids and stuff like that. It looks simple, but it's actually really expensive, or you have to make it and it's really time consuming. And there is that perception that for some reason a basic tunic and leggings and leg wraps and a cloak is a simple costume to put together for a newbie, when it's just not. Nobody has those things already in their wardrobe unless they're already a LARPer or they do reenactment or, you know, they're me. Anyway, I've gone wildly off tangent. I'm just looking at how horribly I've cut out all of this, and there's just going to be silver threads everywhere. What was I even doing when I cut this out? Oh my God. That was a massive ramble, and I'm not sure I actually answered the question, but I definitely answered a question that was in the vicinity of the question that was asked, so winning. Okay, well apparently none of that recorded, so we're doing this again. Remember what the sodding question was now. How do you ensure all your many characters stay visually distinct? Do you ever have a moment of, damn, X looked too much like Y this event? And that was from James, who I need to check whether or not he's okay with me using his name on the internet. So, do I ever have a problem with characters looking too much like each other? No. I always have a little bit of a problem in that all characters fundamentally look like me. Ain't nothing I can do about that. Obviously, I am playing on cheating mode, which is being non-binary, and therefore anything goes. It's really easy to make two characters really visually distinct when one of them is a woman and one of them is a man, because in almost all kit briefs, even the gender blind ones, that is obviously a factor. In terms of keeping characters like visually distinct, it helps me to think about costume in sort of an abstract sense as being made up of three things. You have the silhouette, you have the colour scheme, and then you have the detail or lack thereof. I also cheat because I don't tend to play multiple games of similar kinds of genres. So I have played 2 games about dying horribly on a colony ship in space, neither of which entirely delivered on that premise for very different reasons. But they both had kit briefs of wear basic blacks and we'll give you some overalls. And even then, I did very different things with what I had. For one of them, I cared very much about what I did with my hair, and I took the overalls that were given, I took them off and stopped wearing them quite quickly, because that's how that character wanted to go. For the other one, where I was playing Jones, I did a lot with what those basic blacks looked like, so I wore a sports bra and knee-high boots over this white jumpsuit, and I wore the jumpsuit tied around my waist, and I had a lot of temporary tattoos on, and I did things with my hair, and I wore a particular perfume. So I put a lot of details in to make that character distinct. If I was going to play another game almost identical in kind of setting to a game that I already play, I might just decide to play a different gender, or I might decide to play a very different social class, or I might decide to play a very different faction with a different kit brief. And even if that wasn't the case, so if I did play another Victorian 1880s game, I probably wouldn't play a man, because Victorian men's clothing is really dull and I don't have time to tailor a really boring suit. The Victorian 1880s character I already have, Adelaide, she's a very particular way of presenting herself. She's very upper class, she's very wealthy. There's also a lot of symbolism that goes into what she wears, even though it is pretty historically accurate. Oh crap, I'm bleeding. No, it got on the silk. No. Okay, well that's bad. I don't actually normally bleed on my costumes. Anyway, Adelaide. So Adelaide wears a very traditional 1880s silhouette with the historically accurate undergarment. Accurate ish. It's not actually like made of whalebone or anything. But the gowns that she wears are actually made from Japanese wedding kimono, which is significant because she's a widow and she's just out of mourning and she's wearing bright red wedding kimono. It's a whole thing, right? If I was going to do another 1880s game, even though I wouldn't want to play a man, I would want to play with the same silhouette. I would probably still want to play a wealthy character, because if I'm going to spend that much time and effort into making an outfit, I might as well have the fanciest version of that outfit, not a kind of toned down, boring one. That's just me speaking. That's me personally being extra. But even though I'd be reusing the same silhouette, I would probably pick a very different colour palette and a very different level of detail. So in summary, you've got your three aspects. So you've got your silhouette, and that can mean, you know, am I wearing trousers or am I wearing a skirt? Am I wearing a lot of very long things and am I wearing a lot of very short things? Am I layering up? Have I got big shoulder pieces? What am I doing? Like, is my hair big? Is it very slicked back? Then you've got the colour palette, which is obviously really straightforward. I'm kind of at the point where if I wanted to do another character with a blue and white or a red and black colour palette, I'd have to think about it a little bit more, because obviously Mariana and the Ace of Egrets kind of have those camped out right now. But that's kind of where I feel the last aspect, the idea of detail, comes in. Obviously Mariana has had a lot of costume changes. Mariana has had a consistent colour palette up until now, an inconsistent silhouette. So I've done some very structured kind of court gowns. I've done some sort of more flowing medieval stuff. I've done a coat and trousers, a big deviation from the other stuff that she'd worn. But the colour palette stayed the same, and more importantly, the level of detail stayed the same. So not the details themselves. It's not just plain fabric, it's brocade. Or if it is plain fabric, then there's several layers of trim stacked up on that, or there's beads, or there's ruffles, or it's rarely even just one trim. It's often 3 or 4 stacked on top of each other. And that is, to me, very iconically Mariana. And if I tried to do Mariana without that level of extra, it wouldn't look like her anymore, which is kind of where I'd have to go if I was going to do another character who wore dresses and wore a blue and white colour palette, which, now that I think about it, is actually possible. There was a game that I'm not going to make this year, but I might consider in future, where I was going to play a World War I VAD nurse. Blue dress, white apron, cross on the chest and that. Something that I have done with Mariana before, but it would be very different because it would be very clean and very minimalist and very plain lines. And I wouldn't have the makeup and the jewellery and the hair. So yeah, that question was actually a lot easier to answer than I thought it would be. For me, very much just about breaking it down into those 3 components and making sure that you're not hitting all of them in the same way for the same character. And if you do feel like that character's drifting to look a little bit too much like someone else, figure out what it is that they have in common and what it is that is different. That's probably where your problem is. And that's where you can kind of nudge them a little bit further apart. Or not. Situational clues are great, and thus I don't necessarily think that it's bad if characters do look kind of similar, because they're being represented by the same human. We all have things that we look good in and things that we don't, and I don't feel that you should feel bad about wanting to wear things that you look good in and that you feel comfortable in and that you are happy with. Where am I actually going with the sentence? Bloody hell. All characters fundamentally will look like you, and that's okay. You can play on certain visual cues to make sure that other people know that this is who you're playing, as opposed to your other character in another system who, to be honest, they should know. They should not get that mixed up. That's pretty clear.